The 11-year-old spy who saved D-Day. You think spies are trained adults with fancy gadgets and secret codes? Wrong. One of the most crucial intelligence operations that helped win World War II was carried out by an 11-year-old girl who couldn't even read, and the Nazis never saw her coming. June 1944, the biggest invasion in human history is about to happen. Thousands of soldiers are going to storm the beaches of Normandy, and if just one thing goes wrong, they're all dead. The Allies needed perfect information about German defenses. They had spies, sure, but every single one of them was being watched. The Germans knew someone was passing information. They were hunting for the leak. And that's when they decided to use someone so unexpected, so impossible, that no German soldier would ever suspect her. Her name was Josette, and this is her story. Most people think World War II was won by soldiers and generals. And yeah, they played their part, but the real war, the one that actually mattered, that was happening in the shadows, in occupied France, in secret rooms, encoded messages passed between strangers. Because here's the thing about war that nobody tells you. Information is worth more than bullets. One good piece of intelligence can save thousands of lives. One bad piece can cost you everything. By 1944, France had been under Nazi occupation for 4 years. 4 years of soldiers in the streets, curfews, ration cards, people disappearing in the middle of the night. The French resistance was doing what they could, passing messages, sabotaging supply lines, helping Allied airmen escape. But it was getting harder. The Gestapo was getting smarter. They had informants everywhere. They were torturing people for information. They were executing anyone they even suspected of working with the resistance. And the Allies desperately needed eyes on the ground. They needed to know where the Germans had positioned their troops, where the tanks were, where the artillery was hidden. Because D-Day was coming, the invasion that would liberate France and push toward Germany. But if they got the intelligence wrong, if they landed in the wrong place or underestimated the defenses, the whole operation would fail. Thousands would die on those beaches. Maybe the war would be lost. So they had agents in France, brave people who risked everything to send information back to London. But here's the problem. The Germans knew about them, not specifically who they were, but they knew spies were operating in northern France. They were watching everyone, checking papers, following suspicious people. Any adult acting strangely was a target. That's when someone in the resistance had an idea, a crazy idea. What if they used a child? Now I know what you're thinking. That's insane, that's dangerous, that's wrong. And yeah, you're not entirely wrong, but here's the reality. The Nazis were looking for adult spies, men and women carrying documents, meeting in secret, acting nervous. They weren't looking at children, especially not young girls. Especially not young girls who looked innocent and harmless. Josette lived in a small village in Normandy with her grandmother. Her parents were gone. The war had taken them one way or another. She was 11 years old, small for her age, with big eyes and a quiet demeanor. And here's the crucial part. She couldn't read or write, not because she was unintelligent, but because her education had been disrupted by the war. Her grandmother had been teaching her at home, but it was slow going. And that's exactly why she was perfect. The local resistance cell approached her grandmother first. They needed someone to carry messages across German checkpoints, someone who wouldn't be searched, someone who could move freely. A little girl running errands for her grandmother wouldn't raise any suspicions, and if she couldn't read the messages she was carrying, well, that was even better. If she got caught, she genuinely wouldn't know what information she was carrying. She couldn't be tortured for information she didn't have. Her grandmother said yes, not because she wanted to put her granddaughter in danger, but because she understood what was at stake. If the invasion failed, France would stay under Nazi control, maybe forever. Everyone had to do their part, even children. So they trained Josette, not like a spy in the movies. There were no gadgets or secret codes. They taught her routes, which roads to take, which houses were safe, what to say if a German soldier stopped her. They taught her how to hide messages in her clothes, in her shoes, in her basket of vegetables. They taught her to stay calm, to smile, to act like a normal little girl running errands. And then they sent her out. Her first mission was simple: carry a message from one farmhouse to another, about 3 kilometers away. The message was hidden in the false bottom of a basket, covered with potatoes and turnips. If anyone stopped her, she was just bringing vegetables to her aunt. That was the story. She left early in the morning. The roads were quiet, but there were German soldiers everywhere. They had checkpoints set up on all the major roads, checking papers, searching vehicles. Josette's route avoided the main roads. She cut through fields, followed farm paths, stayed out of sight as much as possible. But she couldn't avoid them completely. About halfway to her destination, she came around a corner and ran straight into a German patrol. 3 soldiers, armed, standing right in her path. They looked at her. She looked at them. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought they'd hear it. One of the soldiers said something in German. She didn't understand. She just stood there, holding her basket, trying to look confused and innocent, which wasn't hard because she was genuinely terrified. Another soldier stepped forward. He spoke broken French, asked her where she was going, what was in the basket, why she was out so early. She told him the story. She was bringing vegetables to her aunt. Her grandmother sent her. The soldier looked in the basket, moved the vegetables around. Josette watched, trying not to shake. The message was right there, under a false bottom, just inches from his hand. He looked at her face, looked at the basket again. Then he laughed and waved her through, just a little girl with vegetables, nothing suspicious. She walked away slowly, didn't run, didn't look back, just kept walking until she was out of sight. Then she ran all the way to the farmhouse, handed over the basket, and collapsed on the floor, shaking. But she'd done it. The message got through, and nobody suspected a thing. That first mission was in March 1944. Over the next 3 months, Josette made dozens of runs, short ones at first, then longer. Sometimes she carried messages hidden in her clothes, sometimes in loaves of bread her grandmother baked, sometimes in the heels of her shoes. The resistance used her to move information that was too dangerous for adults to carry. Details about German troop movements, maps of defensive positions, reports on artillery placements. And the intelligence she carried was going straight to London. The Allied command was building a picture of what they'd face on D-Day. Every piece of information mattered. Every report helped them plan. And a lot of that information was being carried by an 11-year-old girl who couldn't even read it. She got stopped by German soldiers multiple times. Sometimes they'd search her basket. Sometimes they'd pat her down, but they never found anything. She was too good at hiding things, and more importantly, they never really suspected her. She was just a child. What threat could she possibly be? But it wasn't easy. Every time she went out, she knew she might not come back. She saw what happened to people the Germans suspected. There were public executions in the town square. People hanged or shot as examples. The Germans wanted everyone to know what happened to traitors. And if they caught her, if they found the messages that would be her, they wouldn't care that she was 11. They wouldn't care that she couldn't read. They'd kill her anyway. But she kept going, mission after mission, week after week, because she understood in her own way that this was important, that people were depending on her, that the information she carried might save lives. May 1944, the invasion was getting close. The resistance knew it. The Germans knew something was coming too. They just didn't know where or when. The tension was getting worse. German patrols increased. Checkpoints became more thorough. People were being arrested for the smallest suspicions. And Josette was given her most important mission yet. There was a map, a detailed map showing every German defensive position along a specific section of beach. Machine gun nests, artillery bunkers, minefields, everything. It was exactly the kind of information the Allies needed, but it was too dangerous to send by radio. The Germans were listening to everything. If they intercepted it, they'd know the Allies had that information. They'd change their positions. The whole thing would be worthless. So it had to be carried physically, smuggled to a contact on the coast who could get it to a boat and across the channel to England. And they needed someone who could move through checkpoints without raising suspicion. They gave it to Josette. The map was tiny, copied onto thin paper, folded into a square smaller than a postage stamp. They sewed it into the hem of her dress. If anyone found it, it would look like a scrap of cloth, a bit of paper lining. Unless they unfolded it and really looked, they'd never know what it was. The journey was 20 kilometers, too far to walk in one day without raising questions, so the plan was for her to stay overnight at a safe house halfway, then complete the journey the next morning. 2 days, 2 chances to get caught. She left before dawn. Her grandmother packed her a small bag with bread and cheese, some clothes, made it look like she was visiting family, hugged her tight before she left, didn't say much. What could she say? Be careful, come back alive. They both knew the risks. The first day went smoothly. She made it to the safe house without incident, spent the night in a tiny room, barely slept, just listened to German trucks driving past on the road outside. Every sound made her jump. Every pair of footsteps might be soldiers coming to search the house. Morning came. She started the second leg of the journey. This part was more dangerous. She had to cross 2 major checkpoints, the kind with multiple soldiers, barriers, document checks, the kind where they actually searched people. The first checkpoint was routine. They looked in her bag, asked a few questions, let her through. She was just a girl going to visit her cousin, nothing special. The second checkpoint was different. There were more soldiers. They looked tense, alert. Something had them spooked. Maybe they'd caught another resistance member. Maybe they'd intercepted a message. Whatever it was, they were being thorough. They stopped her, made her empty her bag completely, checked every piece of bread, every item of clothing. One soldier picked up her bag and felt along the seams, checking for hidden compartments. Another looked at her papers, really studied them, compared her face to the description. Then one of them said she needed to come with them. She needed to be searched properly. This is it, she thought. This is where I die. They took her into a small building next to the checkpoint. A woman was there, a French collaborator who worked for the Germans. She was going to search Josette physically, check her clothes for hidden items. Josette stood there while the woman patted her down, checked her pockets, ran her hands over her dress, and then she paused. Her fingers had found something in the hem, the map. She'd felt it. Time stopped. The woman looked at Josette. Josette looked back. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stood there waiting for whatever came next. The woman's hand moved to the hem again, felt the tiny square of paper. Then she looked at Josette's face one more time, saw an 11-year-old girl, thin and scared, and trying so hard to be brave. And she stepped back, told the soldiers in German that everything was fine, nothing suspicious, just a child. Why did she do it? Maybe she had children of her own. Maybe she was secretly sympathetic to the resistance. Maybe she just couldn't bring herself to condemn a child to death. We'll never know. The records don't say who she was or what happened to her. But she let Josette go. Josette walked out of that building on shaking legs. The soldiers waved her through the checkpoint. She walked down the road, forcing herself not to run, not to look back. Just walked like a normal girl with nowhere special to be. She reached the contact point 2 hours later, a small house near the coast, handed over the map. The contact looked at it, nodded, and told her she'd done well. The map would be in England within 24 hours. And it was. That map, the one Josette carried sewn into her dress, was part of the intelligence that helped Allied commanders plan the D-Day landing. It showed them what they'd face on Omaha Beach, helped them understand the German defenses, saved lives. June 6, 1944, D-Day, Josette heard the planes going over in the night, hundreds of them, then the sounds of explosions in the distance, naval bombardment. The invasion had started. Everything she'd risked, everything she'd carried, it was all for this moment. The fighting lasted for weeks. Slowly, the Germans were pushed back, villages were liberated, the resistance came out of hiding, people celebrated in the streets. And Josette, she went back to being a regular kid. Or as regular as you can be after doing what she did. The resistance thanked her quietly, told her she'd done more for France than most soldiers, but there was no medal, no public recognition. She was too young to be officially acknowledged. And besides, the war wasn't over yet. There was still work to do. She continued running missions for a few more months until her area was fully liberated. Then she went back to school, learned to read properly, grew up, eventually got married, had children of her own. lived a quiet life in the same region where she'd once smuggled intelligence past Nazi patrols. He didn't talk about it much. For decades, barely anyone knew what she'd done. It was classified, secret, just another story lost in the chaos of war. It wasn't until the 1990s when historians started digging through old resistance records that her story came to light. By then, she was an elderly woman. When they asked her about it, she was modest, said she just did what needed to be done, that lots of people did dangerous things during the war, that she wasn't special. But she was wrong about that. Think about what she did. 11 years old, couldn't read, living under Nazi occupation, and she voluntarily carried intelligence through German checkpoints, knowing that if she got caught, she'd be tortured and killed. She did it not once, but dozens of times. Walked past soldiers with guns, smiled at them, acted innocent while carrying information that could get her executed. And she wasn't the only one. There were other children in the resistance, other kids who carried messages, who hid weapons, who helped Allied soldiers escape. The Germans never suspected them. Why would they? They were just children. But that's what made them so effective. The Nazis had this image of what a spy looked like. A dangerous adult, someone trained and cunning. They never imagined that some of their most dangerous enemies were kids running errands. They never thought to look closely at the children passing through their checkpoints every day. And that blind spot cost them. All that intelligence, all those messages the resistance passed, a lot of it moved through the hands of children. Information about troop positions, supply routes, defensive structures, all carried by kids who were too young to even understand the full scope of what they were doing. Josette's story matters because it shows us something important about war. It's not just soldiers and battles. It's ordinary people making extraordinary choices. It's an 11-year-old girl deciding to risk her life because she understands, in her own way, that freedom matters, that some things are worth dying for. And it reminds us that heroes don't always look like we expect. They're not always adults with training and weapons. Sometimes they're children who can't even read. Sometimes they're grandmothers who send their granddaughters on dangerous missions because that's what needs to be done. Sometimes they're collaborators who choose mercy over duty when they find a scrap of paper in a child's dress. The map Josette carried was one small piece of a massive intelligence operation, but small pieces matter. Every bit of information helped the Allies plan better, fight smarter, save more lives. That map showed them where German machine guns were positioned on Omaha Beach. Because of it, they knew what to expect. They could plan how to overcome those defenses. Did it save lives? Absolutely. How many? Impossible to say. But every soldier who made it off that beach alive, who survived the landing and went on to fight across France and into Germany, they owe something to people like Josette, to the resistance members who gathered that intelligence, to the children who carried it past enemy soldiers. By the time the war ended, Josette had made over 50 missions, 50 times walking through enemy territory with illegal information hidden on her body, 50 times risking execution, and she was never caught, not once. The Germans never figured out that this quiet little girl was one of the most effective intelligence couriers the resistance had. After the war, France tried to recognize what the resistance had done. They gave medals to fighters, honored the people who'd risked everything. But a lot of people fell through the cracks, child operatives especially. How do you give a medal to a child for doing something children should never have to do? How do you celebrate the fact that an 11-year-old was put in mortal danger repeatedly? So many of their stories just disappeared, got lost, forgotten. Josette was lucky. Someone eventually found her name in old records, tracked her down, got her story. But there were probably dozens of other kids doing the same work whose names we'll never know, who carried messages and never got caught, who did their job perfectly and then just went back to being children, and whose contribution to victory died with them. That's the thing about intelligence work. The best spies are the ones nobody knows about. The most successful missions are the ones that stay secret. So when we talk about how World War II was won, we talk about the big battles. D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the push into Germany. We talk about generals and strategy, but we forget about the shadows, the secret war that made everything else possible. We forget about people like Josette, an 11-year-old girl who couldn't read the messages she carried, but understood perfectly well that she was fighting for something important, who looked German soldiers in the eye and smiled while hiding intelligence in her shoes, who walked through danger like it was normal because someone had to do it and she was willing. That's courage, not the kind you see in movies, not dramatic last stands or heroic speeches, just a child doing a terrifying job day after day because it needed to be done, getting up every morning knowing she might not come home, hugging her grandmother goodbye and meaning it as a real goodbye every single time, walking past soldiers who could kill her with a word, and doing it over and over and over again until the war was won. When historians talk about the French resistance now, they're starting to recognize how important children were to the operation, not just Josette, but hundreds of kids across occupied France. They were couriers, lookouts, saboteurs. They did dangerous work that adults couldn't do because nobody suspected them, and a lot of them died, got caught, got executed, disappeared into concentration camps. Their names are lost, their stories untold. But some survived. Some lived to see France liberated, lived to grow old and tell their stories to grandchildren who could barely believe them, lived to see historians finally recognize what they'd done. Josette died in 2003. She was 70 years old. At her funeral, a military honor guard showed up, representatives from the French government. Historians who'd studied the resistance, they gave her the recognition she'd never received as a child, acknowledged what she'd done, called her a hero. But she never thought of herself that way. She always said she was just doing what anyone would do, that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home, the adults who were tortured by the Gestapo and never gave up names, the pilots shot down over France, the soldiers who died on those beaches in Normandy. Maybe she was right. Maybe heroism is so common in war that it stops meaning anything. Or maybe we just need to expand our definition. Maybe heroes aren't just the ones who charge into battle. Maybe they're also the ones who quietly, carefully, courageously do the small things that make the big things possible. The ones who carry messages, who hide people, who risk everything for a cause bigger than themselves. D-Day succeeded for a lot of reasons. Superior numbers, better equipment, brave soldiers, good planning, but also because of intelligence, because the Allies knew what they were facing, because people on the ground in France risked their lives to gather information and pass it along, because an 11-year-old girl carried a map sewn into her dress past German soldiers and delivered it to someone who could get it to England. One small action, one child, one map, connected to a chain of thousands of other small actions, other brave people, other quiet heroes, all adding up to something bigger, all making the impossible possible. That's war, that's history, not just the big moments we remember, but the small ones we forget. Not just the famous generals, but the unknown operatives. Not just the adults we expect to fight, but the children who chose to fight anyway. Josette's story is just one story, one piece of a much bigger picture, but it's an important piece. It reminds us that victory requires more than soldiers. It requires ordinary people making extraordinary choices. It requires courage in forms we might not recognize. It requires the willingness to risk everything, even when you're too young to fully understand what you're risking. And it reminds us to look closer at history, to ask who else was involved, to find the hidden stories, to recognize that behind every major event, there are hundreds of minor players whose contributions made it possible, people whose names don't appear in history books, whose faces we'll never see, whose stories almost got lost. But not quite. Some stories survive. Some heroes get recognized, even if it takes 60 years. Some 11-year-old girls who carried intelligence past Nazi patrols finally get acknowledged for what they did. And maybe that matters. Maybe it's important that we remember these stories, tell them, pass them down. Because if we don't, if we only remember the big names and the famous battles, we miss something crucial. We miss the truth about how things really happen, about who really makes a difference. We miss the fact that sometimes the person who changes everything is just a kid with a basket of vegetables and a secret sewn into her dress. Just someone small and quiet and underestimated who decides to be brave anyway. That's the real story of World War II, not just tanks and planes and battles, but people, Ordinary people doing extraordinary things, children risking their lives, grandmothers sending them into danger, collaborators showing unexpected mercy, resistance fighters trusting an 11-year-old with intelligence that could change the course of the war. All of it connected, all of it necessary, all of it worth remembering. Because Josette mattered, what she did mattered. And if we forget people like her, if we lose their stories, we lose something important about understanding how freedom is actually won. Not just with guns and bombs, but with courage, with sacrifice, with the willingness to do what needs to be done, even when you're scared, even when you're too young, even when nobody will ever know. She knew her grandmother knew, the resistance members who trusted her knew, and now you know, the story of an 11-year-old spy who helped save D-Day, who walked through danger carrying secrets, who looked soldiers in the eye and smiled, who did what heroes do. She survived, she got old, she died peacefully, but before that, when she was just a child, she did something remarkable, something worth remembering. Something that reminds us that heroes come in all sizes, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's looking at. Hit subscribe for more untold stories from history.